Somebody send help. My whip has been like this for quite a long time, and I'm kind of afraid to call a doctor at this point. Whips are bad in Dark Souls 1. Whips are excellent in Dark Souls 2. Whips exist by a stretch of the definition in Bloodborne. Whips are bad in Dark Souls 3. In Elden Ring, you can force anything to work, and whips did not exist in Demon Souls. As someone who's made a point of trying whips in every Souls game, they are by far the best in Dark Souls 2. Whether it's due to lack of options in the category, inability to dual wield, or the lack of important moves like backstabs and plunging attacks, whips are treated as second-class citizens in every Souls game except Dark Souls 2, where they're goated. They even did the category justice with a boss soul whip weapon, and it's good. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but whips excite me. The world needs to see how good they can be in Dark Souls 2, hence I'm making this video. I am Mothy. I'm here today to demonstrate the absolute dominance of whips in Dark Souls 2 with a whips-only challenge run. The rules are very simple. Only use whips to hurt enemies, and kill all 41 bosses. We're going to be hungry for most of the stats on this run. Vigor is important because power-stanced whip attacks can be very slow, and we won't have a ton of poise, so we need the option to trade blows with enemies. Those same attacks are hungry for stamina, so endurance will be helpful. 20 to 25 adaptability is just table stakes for a dodgy build. Dexterity is obviously of chief importance because every whip scales with dex, and it also increases buildup of bleed and poison. We also need 20 just to wield our starting weapon. And some whips ask for a nominal strength level to wield, but none of them scale much with strength, so this just can be trickled up when we need to. So when picking my starting class, I basically just wanted to minimize stats that we won't use. Bandit is the winner here, only wasting a cumulative 11 points between Int, Faith, and Attunement, so that's what we go with. I didn't feel the need to make our dude the classic YouTuber bright unnatural color, but I do like a face tattoo because otherwise nobody is going to use that feature and I kind of feel bad for it. Now, y'all are probably expecting a Devo reference, but that's only been done 1,000 times before. I try to avoid the low-hanging fruit. Our strongest weapon is going to be the old whip, so I settled on naming our character 67 Belvedere. This run is high-key cool for showing off some underused items. Our starting gift is Petrified Something because we can trade that to the crows right away to get a whip. Things Betwixt actually has multiple interesting items for us. The rusted coin near the start will help with the farming we've got to do, and there's a small, smooth, and silky stone hidden by the waterfall that we can also trade to the crows. The dream crow trade for those two items is the old whip plus a twinkling titanite to immediately upgrade it. But just getting the old whip alone may take several retries. If you don't receive an old whip, you have two options. Restart the game and lose the cool car-based character you've created, or load a backup save and try again. It is straight up faster to rush here from a new character, but I'm attached to 67 Belvedere, so I sat here reloading for 29 minutes to get an old whip. It is usually faster than this, but it was just bad RNG. Unfortunately, we don't even have the dexterity to wield this whip yet, and even if we did, the old whip is kind of a build-around item since it breaks almost immediately without support that we don't have access to yet. So we're going to need a backup whip, and that takes at least one boss kill. Options include the Last Giant to grab a plain-ass whip from a rooftop that needs the soldier's key, Dragon Rider to pick up the notched whip in Huntsman's Copse, or actually the Rotten to access the Sunken King DLC early to pick up a notched whip plus 7. That's the highest power level, but rushing that at the start feels a little extreme. Y'all know that Dragon Rider is the path of least resistance, so I head to Hade's Tower of Flame. He's down to one last breath, so lead him 6 feet to the edge. Then, I'm not Alicia killer, so I grab the Wharf Bonfire and warp back to Majula. Those Dragon Rider souls give us the dex we need to wield the old whip, so I pop that in my hands now and the run is officially going. Our new challenge is making any game progress at all. You may as well call old whips pancakes and bacon because they break fast. Our weapon breaks after killing about 5 regular enemies, and it can't really make it through any bosses without breaking either. It breaks especially quickly against hard enemies. Anything covered in armor or rock or crystal is a significant problem. Durability resets when you rest out of fire, unless you let it reach actual 0. If we fully break the whip before opening Leningrad's shop to repair it, it's going to be stuck like that, dealing no damage. So I'd say priority numero uno is reaching Malentia in the Forest of Fallen Giants to buy Leningrad's key. But we've got to get there without killing more than a couple of enemies. That means avoid looting the hollow tree full of sleeping soldiers since we can't kill any who wake up. I spent down most of my durability fighting through the narrow hallway below the Cardinal Tower, and things are looking pretty dire as I open the door with enemies at my heels. We need 1,850 souls to spend at Malentia. 1,000 are critical for Leningrad's key. The other 850 go toward the merchant hat, which we extensively rely on this run for its item discovery boost. After all, to whip is to farm. There is not a chance Old Whip could chew through a pursuer at this point, but there's a very interesting prize in his arena, so I bait him to look around for another try in the eyes of a passerby and fade away. Apparently the pursuer has frosted tips under that helmet. Pulling this trick lets me collect a repair powder. This consumable is misleading. It does not repair a broken item, but it restores durability to your weapon if it's not fully broken. I did not know this at the time because who the hell uses consumables? Is it possible that our whip could make it through the last giant now with the help of a mid-fight refresh? Reaching the boss's fog gate was not hard. Kiting enemies from the front is usually viable because even against enemies with long range, our whips have even longer range. And the way you plant your feet while striking, whips are highly stable to use in narrow situations like on this risky ambush spire. The range is one benefit, but the Old Whip actually beats ass too. I am chunking the last giant with extremely high base damage for a lightweight early game weapon. I feared for its durability, so I boosted with some aromatic ooze that I got in the pate trap, and actually made it one hit from killing the boss before it broke. No problem, said Frog. Blow that repair powder. Oh said Toad. Sims repair powder can't fix a weapon that's already broken. Lamau. Luckily, with the ooze buff still active, I was able to thug it out and cross the finish line on our first actual boss with our weapon broken and defeated, but its memory will carry on. Now, believe it or not, whips have some downsides. Besides the fragility thing, because that's just on the Old Whip. No whip does much poise damage, which makes the Stone Ring a very good option for us. Stone Ring increases the poise damage we deal, meaning the difference between halting an enemy's advance or taking the hit against a lot of small and medium-sized enemies in the game. So my next trip was to Things Betwixt to fight the ogre, but his skin is made of yellow diamonds in the light. My whip is gonna break by my 4th hit. This is gonna have to come later. For some reason, repair powders are super gatekept, being ultra limited until Drangleic, and even then kind of expensive. There is a ring that reduces weapon degradation, but that's behind at least one more boss, and we only barely scraped through the easiest boss in the game. How are we going to kill anything tougher than that? The obvious answer is to collect another whip. Head to the Huntsman's Copse, paying Lycia for access. I'm forced to kill some hollows and thieves on the way in, and the Old Whip barely makes it to the fire. Now, it's a matter of dodging enemies to grab the Notched Whip off of the ground. Notched Whip has the highest strength requirement of any whip in the game at 12, then rudely doesn't have any strength scaling, and still asks 20 dex to wield. I haven't touched my strength stat yet, but I'm able to two-hand this one. The Notched Whip's base damage is not great, but this one comes with innate bleed buildup. Bleed is not amazing in Dark Souls 2, but it is perfectly usable, even against most bosses. When you inflict bleed on an enemy, they take 200 damage on top of your attack, then the buildup resets and you're free to do it again. But that's not the only whip in the vicinity. Bloodied Whip, which confusingly has no bleed buildup, can rarely drop from the whip-wielding slavers in the area. It's an important piece of our toolkit, so I gave this a couple of farming loops. Notched Whip kills slavers in 4 hits thanks to a bleed proc, and it's nice to see bleed immediately proving itself on the farm. Now, Bloodied Whips can be rare, and ideally we want 2 of them for dual wielding. My initial thought was to visit the gutter first to farm up a Prisoner's Tatter's chest armor, which has a minor item discovery buff. But the Silver Cat ring to access the gutter costs 13k anyway, so I might as well farm up the souls I need for the cat ring here against the slavers. I popped a rusted coin for the hell of it, and perhaps as karma for my elongated Old Whip acquisition process at the start, I actually score a Bloodied Whip on my 2nd run. Sometimes the RNG comes through. Bloodied Whip takes 10 strength and 15 dex, so I can already one-hand it. It upgrades with normal Titanite, can be infused, doesn't break immediately, and has fine damage. It's the best all-rounder whip, and has pretty forgiving stat requirements for power stancing. With more sustain now, thanks to my new stable of whips, let's do Pursuer. I used gold pine resin on the oldie to clear the trash outside his arena, and it also held up for 2 hits against the boss. It's kind of funny, resins far outlast the durability of Old Whip itself, so you throw away a lot of value swapping weapons mid-fight doing whips. Then it was just a grind with Notched Whip until Pursuer died. Because that went so well, I decided to try again on the Stone Ring now. Weirdly, the Old Whip held up a lot better this time anyway, but I still needed the Notched Whip to finish off the ogre. Speaking of, I would be ogre-joyed if you would like this video, leave a nice comment, or consider subscribing to my channel. I'm just a little guy trying to produce funny and informative gaming videos, and supporting me like that helps keep me making these videos for y'all. Thank you for considering. Whips have been pretty fun so far, wouldn't you say? But the real fun is in power stancing them. You can fit a lot of whoop in these bad boys. A second Bloodied Whip for the left hand would really make this build click, but let's at least optimize our item discovery before farming again. I was fixated on Prisoner's Tatters earlier, but I forgot the Watchdragon Parma shield has an item discovery boost too. Let's grab that in Hades. I killed the dragon for the shield and got my first petrified dragon bone. We're going to want 30 of these eventually, plus 30 Twinkling Titanites to upgrade 2 copies each of our special whips. Without actually counting, I would say the game just about gives you all 60 of these if you gather every single guaranteed copy, but some light farming or ascetic use can help make up the gaps. Because I was right here, I headed into Old Dragon Slayer right now, even though my Estus was gone and I did not know his moveset. This was a tense fight, but I scraped it out and gained some insight. You'd think his spear has long range, so rolling away from his attacks is stupid. But whip reach is very long too, so I actually had the most success baiting his frontal moves, dodging backwards, then counter whipping. Put those boss souls toward a Silver Cat ring, and I bought out Shalquar's Homeward Bones too. With the Silver Cat ring on, head to the gutter. Whips are not fast, and their damage aside from Old Whip doesn't compare favorably to other weapons with similarly slow swing speeds such as greatswords. But their utility is top notch, and they shine in the gutter. Running R1 swings the whip in a whole-ass semicircle, which is amazing for clearing out poison dolls. You'll never have less trouble with poison spit than on a whip run. This running sweep is excellent against dogs or anything that dodges as well. Whips are also great for abusing enemies through the environment where a sword would clank off. We light it up, we won't come down, and the walls can't stop us now. Their long reaches are really good for popping these equipment-destroying hives too. Since I had to farm prisoners for tatters anyway, I did a full clear of the gutter, then still needed several farming loops. It took me longer to get a dang tatters than it ever did for an actual Bloodied Whip, so maybe this was not a good use of time. But at least my gutter is nice and light. With tatters on, it's time to farm a second Bloodied Whip so we can power stance them. Old Whip is at +1 by now thanks to Twinkling Titanite from the gutter, so it 3 hits slavers, and I swap to Notched Whip once Old Whip is at risk of breaking. Believe it or not, Bloodied Whip number 2 comes in another 2 farming loops of the area. Ladies and gents, this is the moment you've waited for. We're done farming for a while. Let's play the video game. No Man's Wharf is first. Whip's long range is great at knocking dangling men off the piers. The dual strikes from L1 are very good at handling crowds like the ambush at the foot of the main stairs. It's so nice being free to actually touch enemies with our weapons for once. And since this area wants you to have a torch out a lot of the time, I keep Old Whip in my second right-hand slot for better single whip damage anytime the torch is out. The Wharf boss, Flexile Sentry, is a great matchup for whips. See, there's a pillar in the middle of his arena. Backstep his attacks and do him dirty with L2s at long range, or just cheat him through the environment for an easy win. I chose to do Grave of Saints now before Bastille. Rats are a little tough for whips because they can approach you fast and sneak in under your strikes, but running R1s are secret tech. The Royal Rat Vanguard was a slaughter. I slapped Dark Resin on my Old Whip, and one crack of the whip wipes out a whole swathe of rats. Sadly, I broke the whip doing this because the durability loss is based on number of targets hit, not on number of swings taken. The Old Whip breaks so suddenly, you often don't even get an at-risk warning because it can go from 40% to 0 in one strike. I don't think I ever chose to let Old Whip break this run, but I still had to fix it 6 or 7 times from sudden accidental breaks like this. Make sure to join the Rat Covenant after the fight for their ring, which increases poison buildup. That is a build piece we will want a while later. Take the Coffin Path down for a Bleed Stone, which doesn't do anything because it turns out Notched Whip can't be infused. I was sad when I learned about this one. I did ace this trick jump in one attempt though for a random garbage item. Then if you close your eyes, it's almost like we've been to the Bastille before. There's a bunch of pursuers here that we want to chew through for Twinkling. Then open Macduff and blow all the souls we can afford on large Titanite shards to get both Bloodied Whips to +6. I even had a singular chunk from the gutter to put one of them at +7. There's a bonfire ascetic in the elevator shaft below Strade's cell if you want to burn it on the Belfry Gargoyles for the Gold Serpent Ring +2, which gives a big item discovery boost if you were reluctant about farming Bloodied Whips without it earlier. At the bottom of that elevator is a secret path to one of the pursuers, but more importantly to the Bracing Knuckle Ring, which slows equipment degradation. With this ring on and the Old Whip up to +3 by now, I was actually able to defeat a pursuer with only the Old Whip. After structuring the entire run around accommodating this weapon, we've finally built it into something resembling usefulness. Ruin Sentinels. I popped a gold pine resin on the Sunbird and handled Yahim pretty quickly up top. I struggled a bit with the other two Sentinels. The last 2 times I played this game were as a pacifist and a hex run, so I'm relearning most of these bosses on the fly. It turns out, like with old Dragon Slayer, you can have a lot of success using whips if you backpedal their attacks and counter with your own long-range attacks, but I blew a lot of Estus arriving at that strategy. Then, Gargoyles. These were surprisingly rough with whips. They might even be my messiest fight of the game if you forgive the few deaths it took me to learn DLC bosses. Slow whip attacks are tough to sneak in against a relatively fast enemy who doesn't stagger, much less a horde of them, so this boss was a slog. There's a Vorgel the Sinner invasion down here afterward, which I will use as a chance to point out that whips do a great job dismantling NPC invaders, with strong damage and range, plus they're also good at catching rolls. Then let's fight the Lost Sinner. The key to her is keeping a watch on how long she decides to make her combos be. Sometimes a jump is just a jump, sometimes it has 1 or 2 follow-ups. If you can correctly notice the end of a combo, it's worth a free chunky L2, but I ended up making a lot of trades here. We're good to continue straight through to another great soul after that, thanks to the gutter farming earlier. It's only a short stretch to the Rotten. I finished lighting all the sconces to get the gutter denizen invasion, who with their magic attacks was actually a little harder to bait into whippage. I had to rely more on catching them with the environment, much like a trapdoor spider. Then Blood Gulch. I got lucky with a leech dropping a Titanite chunk that I will attribute to my styling merchant hat. Against the giants, I blew a poison resin to try and help with their big hit point pools, but I was not able to build up poison fast enough and had to slog through their whole hit point bar naturally. Then it's the Rotten. He's nice and predictable with big openings, but you occasionally need 3 dodges in a row when he combos, so stamina can be a limiting factor, making L2 attacks risky. I took care not to get caught out, and we whipped him pretty easily. Iron King is my next great soul target, which means back to the cops. Not for farming, but for actual gameplay. But I am going to fight the Executioner's Chariot before the Skeleton Lords. I got to say hello to my Bloodied Whip brothers on the way. I actually died on this fight first time because skeletons followed me too closely into the alcoves when I tried to hide. Stupid horse, I just fell out of the Porsche. Lost the money in my bank account? Oh no. Second try, I used a shield to rebuff the wicked. Once the chariot crashed, I whipped the life out of this old horse like Raskolnikov's nightmare. Joined Titchy Gren's Covenant after the fight for their ring, which increases bleed buildup, like the rat ring does for poison. If we ever pull out the notched whip to go for a bleed strategy, we will want this ring on too. With both of our bloodied whips and notched at +6 or better, we're done needing regular and large Titanite shards, so don't be shy about spending extras to upgrade armor pieces. This actually gives a pretty good return on investment on legs and chest pieces. Back to the cops for the Skeleton Lords boss. Whips one-shot skeletons, clearing multiples if you time it well, which was very satisfying during this fight. I forgot to hotbar alluring skulls, which could have been nasty combined with huge whip AoE. This boss went down in one easy try. On to the Harvest Valley and meet Chloanne. Her inventory seems kinda meh, but I thought I remembered from my As Intended video that she has an interesting gift for spending money with her. Sure enough, she gifted a Twinkling Titanite, making progress toward a 4th Old Whip upgrade. Annoyingly, the skeletons in the valley have slightly higher hit points and don't always die to a power stanced L2. Torch helps with visibility in the mist, so we're on the Torch and Old Whip combo again while its durability lasts. Old Whip is so powerful that a single Old Whip is rivaling the damage of 2 Bloodied Whips, and of course with faster swings. If we can get a second Old Whip to power stance, we're gonna be dangerous. Make sure to grab Poison Stone here. Unlike the Notched Whip, which can't have blood added to its innate bleed, there's a Poison Whip later that can have bonus poison added to its innate poison. The 3 crystal lizards in the clearing only drop shards and large shards, so don't stress about wiping these out. Then I headed in to fight Covetous Demon. Dual Bloodied Whips hit for big chunks, and this fight was pretty fast. On to the Earthen Peak. Mannequin enemies are still bastards, and they're annoying because they don't die to a single strike, but at least our long range helps reduce the pain of fighting them. Light the windmill on fire, then meet Gilligan, who's pretty important for this run. He sets up a ladder for 2k that scores a Twinkling Titanite, but he also sells plain basic vanilla Whip, long past the point we would benefit from one. Whip has worse base damage than Bloodied Whip with slightly better dex scaling, and it weighs half as much. If we weren't investing anything in strength, Whip might compete with Bloodied, but we're adding a bit of strength to use Notched anyway, so Bloodied defeats vanilla Cool Whip for this run. Alright, start the Mytha fight. My job is just to bait her swings and counter with L2s. I love Dark Souls 2 for being slower paced with a longer time to kill that allows you to observe and learn the boss moves. The cadence of moves is fair and intuitive from boss to boss, giving me many first try victories despite not meleeing these bosses since my first playthrough many years ago. Iron Keep is rough. Alon Knights take an L2 plus an R2 to kill, and they keep you on your toes whether to dodge immediately after your first swing or continue attacking. But this place lets me show off whip back attacks. None of the other Souls games dignify whips with the ability to back attack, so I'm grateful to Tanimura for blessing whips like this in Dark Souls 2. Just too bad it's not like a garrote animation. There's twinkling and petrified bones around for those who search, and the boss is Smelter Demon. Smelter Demon doesn't bleed, but he still takes pretty good damage from Bloodied Whip L2s, considering that I'm at minimum stats to wield them. And I got a little fire defense boost by popping orange burrs the crows gave me. Smelter is usually safe to hit after a melee combo, but the best window is after he does a leap and or AoE blast, since you barely need to approach him to hit. After the fight, there's a Pursuer in the same arena. This one is thick and takes quite a while to wear down, giving me a brief worry about whip damage falling off in the endgame. But I think it's just a fluke how healthy this guy is. I'm happy to skip Belfry Soul for once and just rush the next bonfire. The rafters are sketchy as usual, but this is where I'm grateful that whip attacks plant your feet instead of stepping forward when you attack. Do not try to bleed the old Iron King. I say this from experience. But I was convinced that I should try, so rev up the Combine. We're farming again.
Contact confirmed, prosecuting. Copy that.
First, buy Magarold out of his rusted coins and spend enough money so he gives you gold serpent ring +1. Put all your item find gear on. The target is Shadow Gauntlets, hand armor that contributes to the bleed buildup of your weapons. Those drop from these two ninjas in the wharf at a pretty low chance. I farmed wharf until they stopped spawning, collecting their shirt, 2 pants, a shadow dagger, and a crab claw. Dark Souls 2 has some cool weapons. I gotta try this sometime. My options to get more ninjas are to Ascetic the Wharf, join Company of Champions, or try one of the other areas that these guys spawn in. Lost Bastille spawns one, but so does Earthen Peak if you head backwards from the final fire. Turns out this spot is way faster than the Wharf, taking just 30 or 40 seconds a loop to kill this guy. I lucked into the gauntlets after a few kills here. I brought Macduff 2 normal whips from Gilligan, bleed infused them both, then took on Old Iron King with all of this bleed equipment that it turns out he's immune to. Okay, reformulating my plot, or end up in jail or shot. Can we poison this guy? Next try, I throw poison resin on the old whip, chew through its whole durability with no poison proc, swap to Bloodied Whip, poison that too, keep hitting the boss, and eventually proc poison when the boss is almost dead. It ticks amazingly fast. If only we could apply it easier. By the way, I totally had a strong cup of coffee during this, so my voice is getting more energetic as we go. The chest after the fight holds a petrified something, and I'm holding 4 of them now from looting thus far. Is it time to gamble for a second old whip? I did just pump dex to 30, so I'd be able to power stance them. My only concern is if it makes any sense to get another copy before we've even upgraded our first one to +5. But it is more fun this way. This time, the crows give not 1, but 2 new old whips, a petrified dragon bone, and a titanite slab. Pretty good haul. At +0, the new whip is almost better than my bloodied whip at +8, and it is better once I blow a single twinkle to bring it to +1. One great soul remains. I rescued Rosabeth and gave her the cool shadow shirt I got farming bleed gloves. The nasty stomach boys die nice to an L2 of the whips. Against the Shades of Shaded Woods fame, great news. The extra large whip hitboxes are very helpful when you can't lock on. Chloranthy Ring +1 is here, which comes in and out of my build for a lot of this run. I've been operating with Silver Serpent, Bracing Knuckle, Blades, and Giants for the equip load since I have not leveled Vit yet, and I'm carrying like 3 to 6 weapons at a time. And since Whip L2s drain so much of your bar, I'm not convinced of the Chloranthy value since it doesn't help the speed at which you begin to regenerate stamina from 0. The Shaded Ruins hold many gifts. We actually don't need Ornifex on this run, but I thought we did, so I rescued her. There are Dragon Bones and Titanite chunks around, plus the Repair Sorcery. Now, I briefly considered making this whip run a specifically old whip only run, which would have made heavy use of repair, but I preferred the chance to showcase the whole whip family rather than fixate on the challenge aspect of the old whip. Maybe later? A min-maxi point here. I have 2 Titanite chunks now, which I could use to upgrade my second Bloodied Whip from +7 to +8, but I also have a Titanite slab ready for use, so I'm holding out for a 3rd chunk, which will let me upgrade my primary Bloodied Whip from 8 all the way to 10 once I find one. Alright, Scorpioness Najka fight. I still wanted to live the dream of bleeding a boss, so I took her on with my 2 bleed whips. It's definitely a weaker strategy than the impressive raw damage our other whips dish out, but at least these ones can last through a whole fight. It was even a bleed proc that dealt the killing blow. Then onto Doors of Pharos. There's one contraption you can activate in here for a Twinkling Titanite. There's also a chest in here that's supposed to have a petrified dragon bone, but this asshole had pre-destroyed the chest by the time I got to it. What the hell, bro? I might aesthetic this place out of spite later. The boss is Royal Rat Authority. The little ads did not clump enough for a satisfying multi-kill, and I narrowly survived through getting toxicked. Then the main boss was one of the toughest ones to whip, physically speaking. Her narrow legs and tendency to jump away made it kind of hard to land blows, and this fight was a bit of a mess. Then it's onto Seldora. I ignored the soldier camp this time and darted straight for Magus and Congregation. On the way, spiders are introduced when a trapped chest draws them out of the walls on you, but sweet dreams are made of this. These things crunch like autumn leaves to a huge whip swing. Magus was not interesting, except that Magus itself was a 2-hit, and the crawling dudes at the end were a little hard to hit since whips kept going over their heads. There's a bunch of Titanite chunks in the next stretch, and when we reach Ornifex again, she can upgrade both of our Bloodied Whips to +10. At max upgrade, they're pretty far behind even a +4 Old Whip, but I keep them around as backups in case an Old Whip dies on me mid-fight. Oh, and my whips kept getting stuck comically rigid. Freya. I used running attacks to hunt down the little spiders as they fled from my torch. L2s to Freya's head ass are pretty chunky, but I had to swap out quickly for breakage. There's not much special about this fight as a whippersnapper, just that her hardness made you swap out whips quickly. I killed the Duke with a nice back attack, then met Aldia as I lit the final primal fire. Then it's on to the linear part of the game. Falconers on the way to Drangleic die to a single L2. The Mastodons on the steps are a bit of a problem since they recover faster than I do, and I can't stagger them, but I grind through and kill some soldiers to open the castle for a huge power boost. The Bracing Knuckle Ring +1 is sold by Chancellor Welliger in here. This reduces degradation by 35% up from 20, which marks a big increase in Old Whip lifespan and therefore my boss DPS. This stretch also finally got the last Twinkling Titanite I need to get our initial Old Whip up to +5. Okay, this room of animating statues sucks, but Stone Ring makes the difference between staggering them and not, since sadly they do not die to one hit. Meet Grandal again and proceed up the castle. Whips match up well against Cyan Knights thanks to the long range. Then it's Twin Dragon Riders. I was surprised how flimsy these boys are under scrutiny of the whip. The archer took 3 L2s and the other fellow only took a couple more. Grab the key to King's Passage and head to King's Passage. Kill more statue men, then fight the Looking Glass Knight. This is another one I'm actively learning the moveset during. His shield is always raised, so strikes from the side bounce off, but whip attacks do a pretty good job not carrying since they aim pretty straightforward. He brings in one summon who dies to 2 of my attacks, and I finish the fight after having to do a rotation of whips for durability's sake. Real talk, wear your item find gear in the Shrine of Amana. The casters and Archdrake soldiers drop Twinkling Titanite and Old Radiant Life Gems, and the fishmen drop human effigies, so item discovery goes hard here. Then I've been eagerly awaiting this point, because the Demon of Song unlocks the last powerful whip. The fight itself is not much different than normal, just bait frontal attacks and counter. But now it's time for a very silly sequence of errands. First, aesthetic this boss and beat it again because we want 2 copies of its soul. Then trade in both souls at Ornifex for... Hold on. Does Strayed do this one? And he won't talk to us because Bandit starts with 1 intelligence and he needs 3. Okay, so level up intelligence twice, then trade Strayed for 2 spotted whips. Spotted whips have decent base damage and they also have very good poison buildup. Plus, we can poison infuse them to add poison buildup to the poison buildup. Do that now with McDuff and also start cashing in the petrified dragon bones that we've been amassing to level them up. Since these whips are more about the poison buildup than the base damage, it's better to distribute the levels rather than erase one whip to +5, since every spotted whip level adds 19 to our poison buildup, whether you're going from 4 to 5 or from 0 to 1. And we're not done with errands. I have no desire to waste 2 levels on intelligence, so use a soul vessel at the hags to shift that crap into something more productive. I started taking vitality more seriously now that I have at least 5 whips equipped at all times. And we're still not done with errands. Like we farmed Shadow Gauntlets earlier for the bleed boost, there is a Poison Glove analog if we head to the Sunken King DLC. So buy Gilligan's 12k ladder, acquire the first DLC key, and head past the Rotten's Arena to access Shulva, Sanctum City. Stick on our item find gear and loop the 8 Sanctum soldiers just past the first fire. I got the gauntlets on my 4th loop, then did what I can to level them up since they will be a semi-permanent equip. With these gloves and the Rat Covenant ring, Power Stance Spotted Whips apply poison in 2 attacks to pretty much anything that can be poisoned, including bosses. Getting this down to 1 hit would be a huge power boost if possible, but I didn't ever reach that level, so don't stress about trying to. Our sequence of errands is done, and there's no more farming to do for the run. Let's play the video game some more. Undead Crypt. Annoyingly, the huge shield door enemies do not get poisoned, where it actually would be a big help. There's excellent treasure for us here, the Bracing Knuckle Ring +2, which slows equipment degradation down a full 50%. Old Whip is finally at its full potential. It's cool to me how it kind of has a non-traditional upgrade path. You access its power right away, but it's barely usable until this point in the game. Are there any other weapons that work like that in Souls games? Let me know if you know. Velstadt, the Royal Regis Philbin, is another boss that I have to learn on the fly, but he mostly follows normal swing timing rules. I brought in some Dark Taroshes to reduce my dark damage taken once he buffs. He poisoned pretty easily, but it wore off rather fast, so I just whittled him down with Old Whips. This fight was probably my power level minimum for the whole run. After the fight, grab King's Ring, which updates Cloanne's stock with 3 each of Twinkling and Dragon Bones. With this batch, our Spotted Whips get to +4 and 3, and our Old Whips are now up to +5 and 4. Hope you like Aldea's. Aldea's nuts! This is a great place to use a bonfire aesthetic if you need more petrified dragon bones, since 3 are just laying around. But also, play with your item find gear on here, because the little dudes drop them, and not uncommonly. Spotted Whips go hard in Aldea's Keep. Ogres and Mimics have high hit points and poison very easily. Same with this one weird guy that you only see 1 copy of here until NG+. The Guardian Dragon boss is another excellent Spotted Whip victim. It's very safe to L2 her legs, and the poison ticks very fast because she doesn't have that much hit points. She even died to the poison. Dragon Airy can be sprinted through, but it's full of mad twinkling Titanite if you still need any. I Spotted Whipped my way through the 3 small dragons, collecting twinkling for Velstadt's helm that I will eventually want to use, and proceeded through to Dragon Shrine. Poison works well against the Drake Keeper Knights here, but I realized later I should have been old whipping them the whole time, since it's only a 2-shot. Spotted Whip is great against the dual-wielding NPC guarding the stairs though. Grab the Ashen Mist Heart from Ancient Dragon, then start a whippin'. If you have not poisoned this boss yet, you're in for a treat. You can get it going before his health bar even shows up, then just reapply every half minute while his hit points drain themselves out. I actually gave up the Rat Crest ring for Flame Quartz during this fight as insurance because it's so easy to proc poison uncontested. The Giant Memories come next. Giants make good poison victims, but with so much hit points, you have to help them die or the poison will wear off. Collect a Giant Soul in Vamar and Oro, then enter J to fight Giant Lord. He's easily poisonable too, and Old Whips do excellent damage to help him along once the poison is applied. At this point, I feel safe retiring the Bloodied Whips. We have Spotted Whips to use against poisonable enemies, and Old Whips have a more manageable lifespan now against ones who are not. Let's kill Vendrick, but we're gonna miss him when he's gone. This...
So stupid.
This is one poison immune boss that I strongly disagree with. Other poison immune bosses are literally poison elemental or skeletons. Even the Rotten can be poisoned, and Nashandra, but we're stuck whipping Vendrick naturally. Slow dual whip attacks are kind of risky since his hits deal so much damage, and the flexibility of using one whip is helpful. I played it safe and two-handed a single whip with lightning resin on to help the fight go a little faster. In order to delay the difficult DLCs, let's do the Abyss dungeons now. The tech is to do Shaded Woods last since it's the easiest dungeon to repeat if you mess up the boss fight, so I cleared out the Black Gulch and Drangleic Abyss dungeons first. The Black Shade NPCs in these dungeons are all poisonable, but they like to heal, so you may want to babysit them and make sure the poison is lethal. The Caster Ghosts can be poisoned too, which is unexpected but welcome. Hello there, the angel from my nightmare. Dark Lurker is not poisonable, so it's back to Old Whips. I wore the Dark Quartz ring in this fight. This fight is about waiting for openings before sneaking in a single attack, especially in Phase 2, but with some extra Dark defense, you can shrug off certain attacks to trade. Add in Dark Trocious and Fireballs were the only actually dangerous attack. To continue punting the DLC, I chose to fight Throne Watcher and Defender. This one is kind of rough with a slow weapon, I'll be honest. Fortunately, both of them poison easily, and their health is not high, so poison does a lot of work. I even got them both poisoned at once in a particularly choice attack I was proud of. This fight was a bit of a grind with many traded blows, but our whips do such good damage I just forced through a victory in one try. Then Nashandra. She hopes I'm cursed forever to sleep on a twin-sized mattress. Fight that toxic behavior with poison of our own. She has ultra high poison resistance, and get this, takes 3 hits instead of 2 to apply it. There's not a lot else to say. Her strikes are so slow and openings huge, just punish the bad girl until she dies. Feather out now the Funk Soul Brother because I would like Aldia to be the final boss. Then there's no excuse. I've got to face the DLCs. Return to Shulva to do the area for real now. Sanctum soldiers are tragically not a one-shot by like a single hit point. The Stone Ring is critical here to stagger them and allow recovery, or else you will be trading every single time with these guys. Priestesses do die in a single strike though, which is nice. Look, this mace was spinning eternally. I have to say, these DLC areas are way less aggravating when you're not trying to discover every shortcut and full loot them. The area isn't terribly long if you're just running through. Jester Thomas invades in the temple and has so many hit points, but poison will help you out here. He likes to cast warmth to heal himself up, but whips are good at area control and we can keep him out of the healing zone. From there, it's not too far to use the Dragonstone and raise the bridge into the Ziggurat. Once inside, you can battle some optional knights and do looting, or just drop straight down and face the boss. That boss is the Squalid Queen, Ilana Morissette. We have to deny her the cross she bears that we gave to her. She takes decent damage from whips and is very obviously not poisonable. She summoned skeletons I took out with 1 attack each, and around 60% brought out a Vilstat, whom I had to ignore while finishing her. I did accept a couple trades in order to get her burnt down quicker, and I actually got her on the first try. Sin is immediately next, another obviously unpoisonable boss. He's got very hard skin and a high health pool, which makes Old Whips a liability here. But what if we bled him? Notched whip hits are not bad on their own, and I proc a bleed every 3-ish hits depending how closely I can cluster those attacks. The best strategy is to stay in front of him at mid-range. If he shakes his head, consider that bated breath, because we're thrilled to sprint in and hit his neck and chest several times while he wastes time on a breath attack. Or at that range, he will often charge you. Dodge backwards for his uppercut, then whips have the range to smack his head afterward. This fight is awesome. Head toward the Grave Robber fight, and Rockshield Baldur invades on the way. I stick a poison on him, and he tosses a Lloyd's Talisman on me, but it hits us both. These wounds don't seem to heal. This pain is just too real. Whips really give the business to these guys. They can all be poisoned. You don't always get the chance to attack the one you want, but poison works great in those conditions. Just opportunistically smack whoever is free. I got Afflicted Grave Robber poisoned right away, which took them down to about 60% as I focused on the others. I got Sarah poisoned next, and even just the physical component took off a nice chunk of her health. Varg even seemed to poison in 1 hit, which is excellent because he's the thickest one. I got a second poison on AG, who was chasing me, then stuck poison number 2 on Sarah, which ticked them to death first. AG's poison stopped before lethal, but their HP was so low I could easily put them to death. With Varg alone, he was easy to poison again, and I finally had a reason to pull out the Old Whips since I had no unpoisoned foes. It turns out, Old Whips do a ton of damage against Varg, even with his crazy armor, and I might have done better just blitzing them each down with Old Whips. Okay, DLC 2. We've got to get a key to see the DLC. Grab Iron Key from the Iron Keep to open awful Salamander land here in the Forest of Fallen Giants, where I grab the Heavy Iron Key and pop into the Broom Tower. Did you get all that? This area is full of effigies of Nadalia, the Bride of Ash, which, you know what? Who cares? I'm just here to kill bosses. And I have great news. The Ash soldiers who make up a majority of the enemies in this DLC do die to a single whip L2, and they aren't even particularly rough on durability. I race down toward the bottom of the tower. This one huge room full of an ashen idol, several soldiers, exploding barrel creeps, an archer, and a lava golem is normally best handled by thinning it out with projectiles first. But I decided to take the fool's path and risk a long lever pull animation with enemies swarming, and I miraculously pulled that off. We have to kill this one lava golem to get this gate open, and they turn out to be poisonable. Cross the chain to this secondary tower full of exploding oily torsos. These guys can be poisoned and left to die if they do not explode themselves first. Quicksword Rachel invades here. I toss on a poison, then abuse the braziers to whip her from safety. Grab the Scorching Iron Scepter to activate elevators, then head out this balcony for the tower key, and we're ready to hit the bosses pretty much back to back to back. I historically end up doing Smelter last due to it being the least findable in my opinion, but it's not a good climax, so I made it a point to seek him out first. The run into this boss is one of the least fair spots in the whole franchise, so no one should bother clearing this area ever after maybe looting it once on your first playthrough. Against the boss, there's little to say. Old Whip L2s do a fair chunk of damage even through his thick armor, and he is poisonable. By alternating Spotted Whips to poison and Old Whips for DPS in between, his HP went down at a steady pace and I got him first try. By ignoring Ashen Idols, I had enough Smelter Wedges to disable the ones around Fume Knight's arena without having to seek extras. Then it's on to challenge the Fume Knight, one of the deadliest FromSoft bosses for its time. I like to wear Velstat's helm into this fight, which forces him to begin in phase 2. Aside from finding it more predictable, it's just one moveset you have to learn. Fume is sadly not poisonable, but I wanted to check if he bleeds and wasted a pretty messy diagnostic run answering that question. My answer is probably not, but even if he does bleed, it takes so many hits to build up that it cannot be worth it. Old Whips indeed do good damage, and the L2's slow speed is not even a big liability if you know which openings are safe. The Circle of Fireballs is one if you roll backwards first to create some space, then roll forwards and strike. His wide slow swing is a roll under and punish. His leap attack is safe if you care to hang back and bait this. What's not safe are his melee combos, which can be 1 to 3 hits, but even if you read the count correctly, he can recover pretty fast from those and you might get caught. His thrust attack is a trap as well. On my winning run, I got Fume Knight down to the final blow before my whip would break. I had to make a quick judgment call on whether it was poetic to defeat him with a broken whip, and I decided nah. The Prowlers invade on the way up to Elan, and this was a bit of a mess, partially because I did not have a Smelter Wedge to stop the Ashen Idol near where they spawn. But they do get poisoned, and you can get some nice AoE attacks on them. On my own, pretending he's beside me, all alone. I walk with him till morning. Sir Elan cannot be poisoned. Like Vendrick, he's just a flesh and blood dude, so this fact seems pretty rigged. But for science, I decide to check if he can bleed, and he can. If our Old Whips cannot survive the fight, Notched can play backup. I know a lot of players love this fight, and I came around to it on this playthrough. The run-in taints the enjoyment, but there's absolutely joy in learning his moveset. His Cursed Thrust is a false opening because he can start a melee combo pretty quickly after. It's the long-range thrust or uppercut he uses to dash in that are cleanly punishable, so the safest strategy is to force a little distance, bait those moves, and counter. My winning run of this was very clean, and Old Whip survived the whole fight easily. With him dead, do you think we're better off alone? Do you think we're better off alone? That's 2 DLCs done. Only 5.5 bosses remain. Proceed to the Ivory King DLC. Frozen Soldiers and Lois die to a single attack, but the crystal-backed variant do not, and you'll trade a lot of blows with them as a whip user. They're pretty hard too, and they challenge the Old Whip's durability in a way normal enemies haven't for a while. These all-crystal guys have a big health pool that would be good for poison, but that sadly doesn't work. And the larger shield and lance enemies are so easy to back attack, I didn't bother checking for poison. Just back attack once, then time an L2 as they stand up for lethal. Collecting the Eye of the Priestess mostly involved sprinting through, since any desire for loot is long behind us. Then we're ready to take on Ava. I was kind of hoping this fight would take more time to beat, since I'm gonna have to fight 2 tigers later, and the extra experience on their timings would help, so it's kind of a bummer I took her out first try. She is poisonable, but has crazy high resistance to it. Dual poison Spotted Whips were taking 4 strikes to inflict. Strategically, I most wanted to see her leap attack for countering. Attacking after her melee swipes was often safe, but the timing can be tight if she goes straight from the former into the latter. Old Whip came down to the wire at the end, and that was with extensive use of Spotted Whips in between. So durability is looking problematic for the upcoming 2 tiger fight, but for now, count the dub. Head in to meet Alsana and get the castle unfrozen. The next step is collecting knights for the Ivory King fight. I still get really lost in Lois, and this takes me quite a while. I also need the garrison key for Frigid Outskirts access, and that's guarded by a flexile sentry with a tremendous health pool that I poisoned down. Then it's time to fight the Ivory King. Listen, phase 1 was a mess. I remember having some success poisoning the charred knights from my hex run, so I went in with Spotted Whips and the Rat Ring. Unfortunately, they took more than 1 hit to poison, and landing 2 consecutive hits on the same knight is highly unlikely with how their friends like to sprint in from 20 yards to poke you out of your attacks like assholes. Spotted Whips just are not the way for this. I think putting both old whips in my right hand slots and changing when one wears down could be a stronger strategy, since the extra speed helps you land attacks with narrower openings. Still, I managed to blunder my way into phase 2 with 3 Estus, my right hand whip at 80%, and no knowledge of this guy's moves. Asymmetric whip degradation has plagued me this entire run. Despite the L2 attack striking with both whips, I found my right hand whip always wore down long before my left hand. I wondered if, maybe, for L2s that are killing blows, maybe it was counting the right hand whip as hitting the enemy and the left hand as missing since the enemy's already dead at that point. Except it was this way against bosses too, where you're not killing anything except at the end. Anyway, like with Alon, the old Ivory King's distance closing moves, jumps and dashes all left the best openings. Bait a few of these, counter with excellent old whip damage, and I only ended up using a single Estus in phase 2 for a very easy first try. I was going to try and poison him, but I didn't even remember to try between the swift justice I was dishing out. We gotta do the stupid cats now. Reaching Lud and Zalin is unpleasant, and y'all know that. What I have to add in context of a whip run is that reindeer are hard physically. They tear my whips to shreds to the point that I can't even consider fighting them, since the tigers are pretty hard too, and I will need all of my durability there. The boss starts with Lud alone, with Zalin joining when Lud reaches half hit points. It's important to burn down Lud from 50 to 0 as quickly as possible so you're not facing down 2 tigers at once. It helps that I got him just above half, so one more chunky blow took him down to like 27% rather than 49% to start phase 2. Where I would have allowed Ava to disengage and then leap back from a distance, I had to chase Lud down and keep the pressure on him in order to reduce the cat population as soon as possible. Once I got Zalin alone, the fight is just another grindier Ava who buffs herself with big damage resistance and self-healing. I had broken one whip in the rush to blitz down Lud, and my other old whip broke with Zalin still at half. Luckily, these cats do take poison, which was particularly helpful to offset her HP regen while the healing buff is active. Have patience, counterattack her leaps, and that's the final DLC boss handled. Before closing out the game, I do have some unfinished whip business. I would be remiss not to include this content on a whips run. Head back to Shulva and bring a few of those thrown consumables we haven't been using. A free-aimed firebomb can hit the toggle behind these red-eye statues and raise a platform to secret whip heaven. There's a notched whip plus 7 on the ground back here, giving our second copy and fully enabling the bleed equivalent of our spotted whip poison setup. If you wanted another notched whip before now though, you could have just ascetic'd the cops. But the real attraction is the upsetting tree man. If you attack it with any whip weapon, it sheds pollen that restores the durability of our equipment. This is merely a curiosity since equipment restores anytime we rest at a bonfire, but this is a little blessing tucked away in this corner of the easiest DLC, feeling so specifically like a way for old whip users to get a little more sustain. Alright, you know what? Max out that notched whip. I'm gonna try to bleed Alia. I don't think bleed ended up working against him, but I was in no rush, so I employed these underused whips and whittled him down with them anyway. High key, whips are excellent tech for Eldia. You normally have to stop attacking when he turns on his Norton antivirus, but the extra long whip reach and the fact that you don't step forward while attacking means you can just keep chipping in damage through the fire. With Eldia gone, complete the game, then begin Journey 2, the streets. We have one piece of unfinished business for New Game Plus. Sprint through things betwixt, to Majula, to Hade's Tower of Flame. We owe the Dragon Rider a real fight, and these notched whips are still thirsty for blood. Whips are very strong in Dark Souls 2, and I hope you see that by now. It would be facetious to call this a reason that Dark Souls 2 is a great game, but there's some truth to that. I happened to use whips when I first played, and I found them both strong and interesting, which did leave me with a good initial experience of Dark Souls 2. From mixing up your starting gifts, to getting to play with multiple status effects, to the weird durability management minigame of the old whips, there's actually a lot of cool gameplay that whips enable. One of these days I might do an old whip only challenge run, but there are so many interesting weapons in this game that need showcasing. Please, next time you're thinking about a run, check the wikis and pick some random weapon or weapon category that you have not used before and see what it's like to play with. The emergent gameplay can be really cool. Thank you so much to my Mothi patrons. Your support means the world to me. Consider becoming a channel supporter if you would like behind-the-scenes content on my process, plus channel updates and early previews of coming videos. It's a good time. And thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you've enjoyed hearing me say whip for 45 minutes. Again, touching the good buttons goes a long way to enabling further clownery, and I appreciate it greatly. Something something Devo reference? Take care, y'all.